Father Jeffrey Mickler of the Society of St. Paul, a religious congregation in the Catholic Church made up of brothers and priests dedicated to spreading the gospel through the use of media. I would like to share with you some thoughts on chapters 17 and 18 from the Acts of the Apostles. These chapters cover a part of St. Paul's second missionary journey. After St. Paul left Philippi, he arrived at Thessalonica, a tough blue-collar town where he preached at the synagogue, first of all, in order to spread the gospel to the Jews and those Gentiles who were sympathetic to Judaism. But he received resistance there. Nevertheless, he was invited into the home of a Gentile convert, Jason, who gave him hospitality. And he defended his position that Jesus was in fact the Messiah, which couldn't make sense to the educated, devout Jew who would look for a Messiah that would instantly establish universal peace in this world, and obviously that hadn't happened because the world was still filled with conflict and sorrow. Paul, however, proclaimed Jesus as the suffering servant who set the world free. Well, tensions grew. Conflict mounted. Finally, they attempted to arrest Paul and Silas, could not find him, but arrested Jason and some of the other brethren instead. Jason posted bond and got out of jail, and Paul and his companions moved on out of the city. But this is one of the extraordinary things. The more resistance to the gospel there would be at a local place that would force Paul to move on, the more the gospel spread throughout the ancient world. So he goes to Berea. And at Berea, the synagogue officials are all very sympathetic towards Paul and his message. And he would have been able to stay on there, bearing much fruit for the gospel, but people who were opposing him in Thessalonica came down and started stirring up trouble in Berea. And again, he's forced to move on, and he goes to Athens, that center of ancient culture and learning, and really the capital for the Greek peninsula in so many ways. And he looks around the city to see where the people are at religiously and philosophically. And he goes to the center of town where debates were often held. And he begins an extraordinary series of thoughts. And he proclaims to them that they are religious people in every possible way, because he notices all of their altars to all the gods and goddesses. And he takes note of the fact that there was one altar to a god unknown. The Greeks like to cover all their bets. And so they tried to worship and do due reverence to every god and goddess, but just in case there was one left out, they had an altar to cover that. And Paul says, I've come to talk to you about that God that you do not know, who made the heavens and the earth. Now, in the audience were ordinary people and philosophers as well, Stoics and Epicureans. But the intellectual journey of Athens, in a sense, had spent itself. Their great period of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle was long past. They were somewhat jaded in their knowledge and thought they knew it all. But they were listening to Paul with great attention as he talked about this Jewish Messiah. A God-man, well, they could understand that. But a God-man who would die a horrible death, that was pretty repulsive. But finally, when he said that that same God-man rose from the dead, they couldn't take it anymore, because the resurrection of a corpse to them was considered repulsive. They wanted the spirit, the mind, to be saved, but they wanted the spirit and the mind to always get away from this material world with all of its limitations. So he had some converts But the people basically said, you'll have to speak to us again on this matter, but don't call us, we'll call you. So once again, Paul moves on, trying to figure out how we could best reach the Gentile world on the Greek peninsula. And he comes to the extraordinary city of Corinth, a city noted for its hedonism, for its materialism, for its really sinful way of life. And he says, I need to get a job. His funds were no doubt running low, so he goes to the business place of Aquila and Priscilla, two Jews who had just been kicked out of Rome by the Emperor Claudius and moved to Corinth. Claudius kicked the Jews out of Rome in the year 48 because of disputes about a Christus, which is no doubt Christ. And when Paul goes there looking for work, he finds much more. He finds two fellow believers who take them into his confidence. And he trusts them completely. And they tell him how to best go about reaching the Corinthians. And he preaches Christ and Christ crucified, and that stirs their hearts and minds and imaginations. And he finds lodging in a home right next to the synagogue, and he converts the head of the synagogue, Crispus. So everything is going well in Corinth, but once again, enemies of the gospel come from elsewhere and stir up trouble. The next thing you know, he's drawn into court, and he's accused of proclaiming a king that was opposed to Caesar. The governor said, this is a religious dispute. I don't want anything to do with it. And they suddenly start beating up one of the synagogue members, Sosthenes, in the hopes of getting some sort of proclamation of Paul's criminality. So you could see it was quite a tumultuous scene. But Paul had laid the foundations of a vibrant church in Corinth. His friendship with Priscilla and Aquila was very powerful. And this couple was the most traveled couple in the New Testament, because first they had moved from Rome to Corinth, and as Paul's ministry in Corinth began to come to an end, they moved with Paul from Corinth to Ephesus, where they established the church in a new fashion there as well. So you could see the Holy Spirit moving from place to place, town to town, with Paul establishing communities, koinonia, appointing people to direct those communities, and then moving on as opportunity and the Spirit would direct him. In our own lives, we should never be discouraged or lose hope, because in the 21st century, the Holy Spirit is alive just as it was in the first century. And the Holy Spirit has something new and extraordinary for each one of us in our lives. We come to know what to do next by simply observing the circumstances of our lives in a prayerful, devout way. The Lord may close one door for us, but open another. And as we move through this life, we should encourage one another and support one another in our efforts to live decent, godly lives and to tell the story of Jesus not only with our words, but with our charitable, heroic, and kindly actions.